Hey guys, welcome to God's Men of Influence. Today's show right here is going to be called Discovering Intimacy, and it's kind of a tough one. So I'm bringing in the specialist to talk about that, Mr. Mark Howerton. He's our marriage family therapist. And, one of our goals here at God's Men of Influence is to create better husbands. So better husbands, there's a million things that we need to work on all the time, but intimacy, no matter how you cut it when it comes to marriage, is one of the key factors. So I believe there's probably some serious intimacy issues out there, and it doesn't seem right because, a lot of you started out that way, and then you got married and you had kids, and you should have the peak of your intimacy. You have this whole family and this beauty and this, what God wanted from you all here in front of you, and yet the intimacy falls apart. So there's 4 key factors to intimacy that I want you to touch upon. I'll let you pick which one you're going to go first. Is it intellectual?
Well, I like I said, there's four dynamics of intimacy. The thing to note first is that intimacy takes effort. To just assume, wow, we're going to have this dynamic, wonderfully connected marriage for the duration of our marriage. And if you're newly married, you're hearing this and you're thinking, wait, it sometimes takes work? Like, what the heck? Like, this is amazing. The early marriage, this is wonderful. I'm having a blast. There's no issues there. As life progresses and our jobs increase and finances become stressful or the kids become more challenging, so do the taxations on intimacy in our marriage. Also, when we say intimacy in and of itself, the first word that comes to mind is sexual intimacy. Well, this is amazing. I want more sexual intimacy, or I'm satisfied with intimacy. And how do we, foster even more exciting sexual intimacy? Or, gosh, we're not having enough sexual intimacy. So that becomes sort of the first definition or belief about this word, intimacy. But for us to have a healthy relationship, we have to understand that like you said, there are 4 aspects of intimacy. And I've coined this phrase, relational intimacy. And that's really our goal in marriage, that as a man, I want to be in a relationally intimate dynamic with my wife. And so the illustration is kind of like a tabletop. So if you can imagine a tabletop with the word relational intimacy on top of it, the 4 legs of the table are the different aspects of intimacy that we'll discover and develop. I mentioned sexual intimacy. You suggested intellectual intimacy, and we'll start there. Intellectual intimacy, the idea, and this is really kind of zany. People hear this and think, really? Like, that's going to foster intimacy? But the definition of intimacy literally means knowledge. It means the full knowledge of another person. And insofar as, remember, maybe if you read the King James Bible, back in the Old Testament, they'll say, the man knew the woman. And so the idea of even the word knowledge was about this idea of sexual intimacy. And then later on in the 16th century, the word or the phrase was actually drafted by the church of the 16th century that you've heard before, and it says, for uncarnal knowledge, F-U-C-K, and that's where we get that word. And that word was actually a phrase coming from the church to say, hey, that is not acceptable sexual activity. Wow. Again, with this idea of knowledge. So knowledge and intimacy go hand in hand. I have to be able to fully know you and you to fully know me. There's no hindrance. There's nothing between the two of us being one. So then when we think about that and say, how can we be intellectually intimate? It's kind of a weird idea. Yeah. But the idea is literally, I want to know what you think. I want to know how you see the world. And so if we can be in our marriage that intentional to say, I want to know really what my spouse is thinking, what makes her tick, for her to want to know what makes me tick in that intellectual level, that's one of these pillars of intimacy. And the irony is, and we'll hear this in a couple of the other expressions of intimacy as well, it doesn't have to be exactly the same. So for me to really engage in understanding what my wife knows and what she thinks about things, I'm fostering intimacy even if we think differently about that particular thing. Or I have a set of knowledge here and she has a set of knowledge there. Even though it's different, it's still intimate because she's sharing with me what she knows. And really practically what that means, let's say if you have an appointment and you're sitting in a waiting room for 10 minutes waiting for your appointment, and you pick up a magazine and you read an article, a random article, Time magazine about something happening in the world, or a fitness magazine about a way to stay healthy or fit, you've engaged in new knowledge acquirement. From that new knowledge, I share that knowledge with my spouse. As simple as it is, that's an intimate act. to come home and say, hey, and checking in on the day, how was your day? Interestingly enough, I read this article about X, Y, and Z. That's the sharing of knowledge. Even though it's not really vulnerable, even though it doesn't necessarily feel passionate or emotional, it's still sharing that intellectual intimacy. And we want to foster that in our lives.
Okay, let's say you do that, and she has absolutely zero interest in hearing what you had to say. Even though you're a big, tough guy and you brush it off, does that really kind of hurt you inside and maybe take a step backwards on the intellectual intimacy piece?
Sure, it sure can. And the thing is we realize that if we keep that tabletop illustration in mind, if, you guys have all been to a restaurant where one of the legs on the table is not as long, and so you grab a couple of sugar packets, and put it under the table leg. So then all of a sudden it becomes an imbalanced intimacy. And so that's going to affect the other dynamics of intimacy.
Okay.
So many relationships think, hey, we're dynamic. We have a great sex life. We're going to be wonderful. Well, that's cool. That's great to have a great sex life. Or we pray together and we have a great spiritual, connection. That's great. That's one dynamic of intimacy. But nobody wants to eat dinner on a tabletop that's at a 45-degree angle.
Yeah.
We want to have a nice, balanced, whole, expression of intimacy. So specifically, I would suggest to that guy, if I was counseling him or if I was experiencing that in my own life, I would reconnect with my spouse and say, hey, babe, this is a part of what makes us intimate. I want to know what makes you tick, and I want you to know what makes me tick. How can we invest in this time of intellectually being intimate just as much as we need to invest in being sexually intimate or spiritually intimate or emotionally connected? Yeah. So I think the key is that there's commonality, that you guys are on the same page. So if she's not getting it, to say, hey, listen, I heard this amazing podcast. Oh my goodness, this great podcast. And this guy suggested that, we're on the same page like this. Well, then that's what I would want to do. Say, hey, one of the ways we can build intimacy is fostering this intellectual connection.
Okay. What's the next one?
Yeah. The second, since I mentioned already, let's talk about it, about sexual intimacy. And sexual intimacy, like I said.
Oh man, we got to leave that for last.
Okay.
Let's do spiritual. We're gonna leave that one for last. How about spiritual?
Great. That's great. So spiritual intimacy, and again, like intellectual intimacy, here's what's wild. I had a spiritual mentor tell me that the vastness of God is so great we can't even imagine it. And Ephesians talks about that, immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine. That unique expression of God has a unique relationship with you, and a unique relationship with me, and a unique relationship with every individual that looks uniquely different. So for me to expect or demand that my connection with God and my spiritual walk is just the same as my spouse's, I don't think that's a wise conclusion. Certainly there are disciplines and there are spiritual formation exercises that are wise, but to think the spiritual intimate encounter that I desire with God will look exactly like the spiritual encounter that my wife experiences with God. So to say I want to foster spiritual intimacy within who I am as a person with God, I welcome and bless her to do the same, and then we share with each other what that looks like. So that's going to look like at times praying together, attending services together, going to a Bible study together, being in a group together, reading through a book together. Wonderful, wonderful things. That's what I would call maybe the first few layers of our spiritual expression. Great things, but it's those foundational things. The deeper level is that idea of truly wrestling with faith, truly, discovering, God, I want to know you even more powerfully than I think I know you now. To be stretched in my spiritual mind that says, God, you are bigger than I can possibly imagine. For us to experience that as individuals and then share it with our spouses, that's that spiritual intimate encounter. Yeah. Certainly, it just is so rich when we're able to have worship times or prayer times together. Obviously, that's amazing. But on top of that, to say, and I realize and bless your unique experience of discovering God as you bless my unique experience of discovering God. We're doing that together and individually.
Yep.
That's really what that spiritual intimate encounter looks like.
I just make a couple comments on that, and again, I don't get paid for this. You do, so. But listening to you talk and saying a couple things, I know in my personal relationship, praying with my wife outside of like the dinner table and all that was easy. But for some reason, praying in bed, just the two of us, I had such a hard time doing that. And it was as I was becoming more and more mature in my walk, it was something I knew I had to do. And for some reason, I always chicken out. Sitting there, laying in bed, time to go to bed. It's all quiet. And I'm like, gosh, I got to do it right now. And I couldn't do it. It took me forever. But I can tell anybody out there right now that it's absolutely something that is, I'm going to call it one of the most important things in your relationship, is to learn how to pray with your wife when it's just the two of you, and not blessing the food, not praying over the children, but just the two of you. It did wonders for us. I know it did a lot for her, and I think it earned me a lot of respect as a man, which I would venture out to say one of the biggest problems we have is, a lot of men have lost respect because they don't act like men anymore.
And the idea of respect, that's great. I agree with you. There's been this loss of respect in men, in masculinity. Part of the challenge in our society has been what are the roles of man? And rather than, kind of build a big rah-rah campaign of saying, come on, guys, we blew it. We got to fight for our right to be respected, in the home and whatnot. It's like you said, leading spiritually, that will be a respectable action. Yeah. And if I want respect, I need to be respectable. And so if I'm just sitting back, hey, darn it, you're supposed to respect me because I'm the man or because I'm the husband, well, that's not very respectable. It's a lot easier to get respect than to demand respect. Yep. And so what can I do to continue to say, I am being respectable as a spiritual leader or mentor or just spiritual servant in our home, and that naturally creates that respectful response.
Yeah, for sure. So what about the third leg, the emotional leg?
Totally. And this is where guys are just kind of like, what's emotion? I joke. I should be honest. My wife teases me that anytime there's a new movie coming out that's like a sports movie, like a baseball movie that's coming out, and there's the big trailer with the music that's rising up, she'll look over and say, "Are you crying, Mark?" And I'm like, "You jerk, knock it off." But that's the whole idea, is that what is emotion, and do you guys really have emotion, and do we express emotion? And that's a female vocabulary word, not necessarily a man's word. But the reality is we are emotional beings, and sure, it might show up in places like patriotism or sports, or seeing our kids ride their bike for the first time or whatever. Those are little moments of emotion, but we have a ton of emotion throughout the day, and we typically either squelch it or we blow up with it. And so what we want to do is we want to hone emotional vocabulary. We want to try to become people who are more expressive in our emotion. And again, in the same way, like you said earlier, with the intellectual piece, there might be a little bit of a drawing out of that. So to say to my wife, here's an article I read, can I share this with you? I'm drawing the emotional or the intimate encounter out with her. It's important for me to share this with you. Likewise, we might need to look to our spouses if our wives are more emotionally expressive and say, help me express my emotion more. I think I'm feeling something. I literally coach my guys sometimes in my counseling office to say, just say what you're feeling or describe the feeling. Even if the feeling description is blah. Like that's a good start. If you don't know the blah means anxious or nervous or insecure or lonely or scared, but at least it's yuck, ick, ooh. Like, let's start with something, kind of caveman emotional language, and we'll develop an emotional vocabulary. And we might need to lean to our spouse to that, to say, I see this emotion, I'm feeling something, I hear you articulate it. If your wife's more emotionally expressive, I want to express my emotion like you. How can I do that? I think it's this. I think I'm feeling this. Can you help me with this? Just like that emotionally vulnerable place of laying in your bed together next to each other and saying, let's go before God in this. Wow. Talk about intimate. To have this emotional thing churning in my gut and not know what it is and say, honey, please help me verbalize this. That's going to be such an emotional encounter with our spouse.
I'm still not quite sure what you're talking about, but I guess you were right. It's a little more difficult for men on that piece.
Sure.
So let me ask you, the famous book, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, right? We have two
great book. I love it.
Totally different ways of communicating. How do we do that when we are so different? And I'm going to give you an example here. Men are supposed to know that women like to congregate around each other. They just want to be heard. They don't offer solutions. They just want to be able to talk and be heard and support. You support them, you love them, everything's cool. And it's not in our DNA to do that, but we know now because we've been educated, so we do it, right? But after it happens, 4, 5, 6, 10,000 times on the same topic, as a man, don't you just kind of lose it and be like, stop doing that, like fix it, let me teach you how to fix it. And then all of that like support that you gave is gone out the door. You're an absolutely worthless human being, right? So how do you get through this? Like, I don't,
that's great.
I'm just a regular man too, and I struggle
great.
with this stuff.
Yeah. And I wish I could, tell you I've got it all figured out and my marriage is perfect. I never fall into this trap, but no, there's a reality that there's a difference between knowing the path and walking the path, and so I need to keep myself accountable to that as well. The other side of that is good news for me. I'll always have job security because us guys are always going to put our foot in our mouth and flush the whole build out for a long time. Well, a couple ideas on that. The first is that the hope that we can learn in a more deeply ingrained way because of positive reinforcement. I actually use the phrase empathy magic. And there's something really powerful when we are in that empathetic place with our spouse and we're able to listen and say, hey, honey, I'm hearing you say that you're having a hard time with this. That must really stink, doesn't it? I can imagine that would really be, hurtful or lonely or frustrated. That's gold, man. That's like we're like just dumping just gold into her emotional bank account. And the hope is we receive a positive reward from that. And we realize almost like, again, not to degrade us as guys, but kind of that dumb caveman guy who's just kind of like, I'm sorry that hurt you, honey. You must feel sad about that. And she's like, responding so positively. I'm like, holy moly. I learned this works, so we can hopefully realize that there's a value to that. There's a value to that. And in that emotional reinforcement, we're able to guard ourselves in those moments of exasperation and say, enough already. The practical side of it, though, because I'm extremely pragmatic, I love the theories of ideal connection, and that'd be great if we had this awesome time. I don't have that relationship, I don't know. I know some guys who do, and I don't know about those guys. But, for the most part, most of us are figuring it out on the daily. So practically speaking, if we at least can keep on our radar, our wives want or feel the need to just emotionally express what they're experiencing and not get the fix. Because like you said, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. We put our fix-it hat on and we want to fix the problem. Just solve it. I'll give you a solution. And she doesn't want a solution. She just wants to be heard and validated. Okay. So what I would suggest is practically saying, honey, how can I help you in this? What do you need from me in this? In the same way, I want to have that dynamic relationship where I can say, honey, help me express what I'm feeling. Like there's something going on, but can you be with me while I'm trying to figure this out? That's going to be just, again, gold in her bank account for you to say, how can I help you in this? Do you want me just to listen and do my best to empathize? And I mean that on purpose. Do my best to empathize. That's a skill that we are learning. It's just like any other skill that you can learn. We are learning it, and sometimes we do it well, sometimes we don't do it well. So do you want me to do my best to understand where you're at and just empathize? Or is this a situation that you want to help me move? I can help you move to solution, that I can suggest a solution. And hopefully, again, she has enough emotional intelligence to be candid with you and say, honey, I just need you to hear me on this. I just need to be able to talk about this. Okay, I'm in. I'm going to do my best to be here and be present in this.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the last leg, the physical
intimacy. That's right. Yeah. And so again, the whole idea is we have this nice balanced table across the board that we've connected emotionally, intellectually, fostered spiritual intimacy. So we have this nice, hopeful table that's coming up. And a lot of times the relationship will be imbalanced in this way, that there might be a void of sexual intimacy. And it might feel like, hey, it's coming from my spouse, or actually, a lot of times guys would say, I'm really okay. I don't have the sex drive that I thought I would have, for whatever reason. So there might be an imbalance there. The key is that with intentionality, we foster a healthy expression of that. Whether or not that healthy expression looks like being sexually intimate, 2 to 3, 4 times a week, or 2 or 3 times a month, that there's an active expression of sexual intimacy. I heard a Christian sex therapist say that in the books of the law, you heard Jesus refer to the books of the law. And so certainly he's talking about the Torah, the Old Testament, the books of Moses in the Old Testament. But there were other books that the Pharisees and the religious leaders used. There were books on how to live your life, and just kind of these wise books that were this larger collection of the books of the law in the ancient Jewish culture. And there was a book that was specifically talking about sexual intimacy in the relationship. and I've got to find it because I want to have this direct quote on this to be able to find this for research purposes. But that there was a command that a part of the Sabbath, a part of the day of rest, was being sexually intimate and being mutually satisfied in your marriage bed on Sabbath.
Interesting.
So part of sexual or part of Sabbath celebration of rest, of connection with God, was also connection with your spouse in the sexual way. And so that's something that we invest in. What that idea becomes, and this is really hard for couples who are newly married. Easier for guys who have kids, and easier, for the families that have a lot of kids and a lot of busyness in life. But the idea of saying schedule sexual intimacy. Like, no way, it's supposed to just be passionate and spontaneous and exciting and, all this sort of thing. And sometimes it is, and that's great. But the reality of pragmatic life often becomes this expression of we need to schedule. We know that we have date night, on these nights, and those are nights that we're also sexually intimate. We know we spend some time together, on Sunday afternoons, and a part of that is we take a nap and we have sexual intimacy during that time.
I'm sending my wife a calendar invite for tonight. I want to let you know how it goes.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
What time? Let's say 9 p.m.
9 p.m. Perfect.
Okay, today I'm going to let you guys, well, maybe I won't let you all know how it goes. I'm going to remind her 15 minutes before, and I'm going to do an invite. Here we go.
That's great.
Lindsay.
And say, Mark said that I'm supposed to do this.
There she is.
That's great.
Done. Let's see if she responds while the podcast
That'd be
is
awesome.
still going on.
That would be awesome. Yeah, keep your eye on it.
All right.
That's great.
Try that, guys, right now. Send a calendar invite according to Mark and schedule it.
Well, honestly, if we want to play this game, I would say first, go buy flowers.
Come on. You should have stopped me. How about just bring flowers home?
Bring flowers home.
Okay.
But again, it's the idea of intentionality. We should be showing love.
Yep.
Flowers, a note, a card, a call. That expression is an active expression of I love you and I want to connect with you. Sometimes we organically feel it. I'm just feeling alive, full of love, excited to share love with you. Other times we do it because we want to invest in the well-being of our relationship. Almost out of obligation or commitment. Out of the commitment or the obligation I have to investing in our marriage, I went and bought flowers. Hopefully, our spouses are able to respond, similarly. Out of wanting to be intimate in our relationship, I want to have sexual time.
Let me ask you about flowers, and this goes to one of the other shows we did about how, our past, right, and things we've learned. Well, in this particular case, I learned this from a guy, and it makes sense to me, and I might be way off now, and I'm listening to you, and I'm thinking, gosh, I can't believe all these years I've actually, thought this, right, and let me see what a therapist actually thinks. So the advice that was given was when you guys are in a fight, is most men will go out and buy flowers. But all that does is promote positive things during bad behavior.
Negative attention seeking?
Yeah.
It's like a parenting seminar we'll talk about kids getting a negative attention and accepting it.
What's your thought on that?
Yeah.
Save it for the good times when things are great.
Sure.
Then go buy her flowers.
Sure.
So,
well, in all things, it's proactive versus reactive. If I can be proactive in expressing love, that's going to serve me well. If it's reactive, it counts, but it's at a discounted price. You had to give me flowers because we got in a fight, or maybe I'll get in a fight more often so I can get flowers more often. So the more we're proactively showing actions of love, and flowers are just one thing, and I don't even know that they're the right thing. I'll be honest with you. For me to go and buy cut flowers for my spouse, that's not her love language. She'd say, there's some other things you could have done,
Yeah.
And so part of that is knowing our love language and our spouse's love language. I hope you mentioned other times, a great resource to add to the resource page on the website it's called the 5 Love Languages, and I believe it's 5lovelanguages.org. Okay. And it's Christian psychologist Gary Chapman who has coined that term, the 5 love languages. And the idea is that every person has different expressions of feeling and giving love. And gift giving is one of those things. And so knowing what is that expression of love that your spouse feels, finding it and meeting that unique need.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right.
Yeah. And scheduling sex and then having fun sex to finish up on our relational intimacy piece.
Let me check real quick just in case there's a response. I do not have an acceptance just yet.
At least it's not a decline.
It's not a decline. Okay, well, we'll give her a few more minutes to look.
Sure. Hey, listen, and here's the deal. Sexual intimacy is also one of the places we feel most vulnerable in our relationships. So, we're joking about accepting or declining or whatnot, but if you fall in the dynamic of the relationship where as the man you want to have sex more and your wife doesn't want to have sex as much, you find yourself initiating sex, possibly her not accepting every time.
Yeah.
What I would want you to do as a couple, and I would encourage you again to say, hey, listen, let's seek some help or coaching on this, but for her to be able to say, I'm not there tonight, but I do want to be intimate with you. Let's make sure that we have some time together this weekend or tomorrow night or whatever the case may be. So it doesn't take that emotional hit to guys.
Yeah.
Again, we think we're these tough guys. We're vulnerable little guys. And so when all of a sudden now I'm not validated, I'm not, accepted in the sexual performance part of our relationship, maybe, I don't feel so great about myself. So to coach your wife or bless your wife or help your wife bless you to say, hey, let's try this tomorrow night.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thanks again for everything.
Pleasure. Great to be here.
And for all you guys, if you missed any part of this or you want to just go get a little bit more, a few more resources, go to godsmenofinfluence.org. You'll have all our stuff over there. Plus, we're going to put up the book, The 5 Love Languages. You can just go to the books tab. It'll be right there. You can just purchase it from there or do a little bit of research on it yourself. Okay? Thanks. Remember, be blessed, be joyous, and be welcome. God's Men of Influence.